Center for Security Policy, and he is going to be speaking at the Tampa Tech State Tea Party on April 15th. We are glad to have him on the show. Mr. Gaffney, how are you this morning?
Very well, thank you.
Very, very good. Could you tell our listeners what the Center for Security Policy is and its mission statement?
Well, it's reduced to two words: secure freedom. Now, our business is to identify threats to this country and to encourage people who are, public-minded citizens to both understand those threats and to take actions in their communities, as part of the electorate, and as individuals to try to counter them and thereby to secure our freedom.
Excellent. How did you, sir, get involved in these security policy issues?
Well, I, at a very young age, had the opportunity to serve in the Congress of the United States with two distinguished United States Senators, Henry Jackson, Scoop Jackson, a Democrat, and John Tower, a Republican. I then went to work in the Reagan Defense Department, starting out as a Deputy Assistant Secretary and finishing acting as an Assistant Secretary of Defense, at a very exciting time when we were waging and ultimately, I think, winning the Cold War. And it was a formative time in my life and extraordinary opportunity to serve my country.
Excellent. How do you think this country right now, and I'm going to ask the hackneyed question, are we safer now than we were 18 months ago?
I think we are dramatically less safe in a number of different respects than we were 18 months ago. Principally, I would say because of what I call the Obama doctrine and its repercussions. I characterize it with 9 words. The Obama doctrine, I believe, is emboldening our enemies, undermining our allies, and diminishing our country. And the cumulative effect of that doctrine playing out now over the past year and a half, I think has unmistakably been to give us a world that is more dangerous, with more enemies, or at least more aggressive enemies, fewer friends, or at least fewer confident, reliable friends, and a country whose stature in the world is unmistakably reduced in ways that I think are both undesirable and really quite reprehensible. This is the greatest country ever in the history of the world, and that's not chauvinistic, that's a statement of fact. And for our president and for his government and for an awful lot of other people to believe otherwise or act otherwise is a scandal.
Very good. Can you give me an example, and give my listeners an example of how and what enemies, in your opinion, have been emboldened?
Well, where to begin? Communist China is ever more assertive, both economically and militarily. It's, I think, taken the measure of this president and concluded that it can basically do what it wishes, not only in its region, but elsewhere around the world, with its currency, with its growing cyber warfare capabilities, with its assertiveness in the South China Sea, and with its really quite imperial ambitions in places as far away as East Asia, Africa, and as close as Latin America. Then there's the Russians. We've just seen this spectacle of the president signing a new arms control treaty with the Russians and hailing a brave new era in U.S.-Russian relations, reset from those terrible days of the Bush administration, only to have the next play be the overthrow of the government in Kyrgyzstan, something that the Russians, if they were not directly responsible for, are certainly going to benefit from. at our expense, probably leading to the closure of the Kyrgyzstan air operations that have been instrumental to supplying our forces in Afghanistan. Hugo Chavez in our hemisphere is unquestionably ever more aggressive in trying to bring down pro-U.S., pro-Western governments in the region. There are fewer of them, and in their stead place sort of Chavez clones, people who are rapidly anti-American, who are socialist or communist, and enabling the penetration of our hemisphere by the Chinese on the one hand, the Russians, the Iranians, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the like. So there's just a few examples, but they're illustrative of a very much larger problem, and that is, I think people are concluding it is better to be an enemy of the United States than one of its friends. And that only contributes to a more dangerous world.
And speaking of that, of being one of our friends, in what you said of emboldening, undermining, and diminishing, your examples, and I know the obvious example of course is undermining of the Israelis. Are there other of our allies that the current policies have undermined, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think you basically can look at any country that has been an ally of the United States and point to examples where we have signaled that their friendship with us is not what it once was, for sure, and may actually be more or less non-existent. Look at Honduras, a tiny, poor, but democratic country in our hemisphere that was resisting in constitutional ways the kind of takeover that I just talked about by Hugo Chavez. And where did the Obama administration come down? It insisted that the government of Honduras reinstate at Chavista, that it, when it refused to do it, it punished it brutally with economic sanctions as well as a host of sort of political warfare techniques. And even now, after an election in Honduras, clearly established a new legitimate government through democratic means, the U.S. government is still trying to undermine the country with, restrictions on visas and other techniques. This is outrageous, and I think it is not something that the American people would tolerate if they were aware of what Barack Obama's administration is doing.
Well, and I'm going to go ahead and ask you about the obvious ally, and I think one of the more important allies, especially in the region that we continue to be looking at. How is, in your opinion, our relationship now with the Israelis?
I think it's fair to say that even in what were previously probably the most difficult days of the U.S.-Israeli relationship, namely those of George Herbert Walker Bush and Jim Baker, they look like a strategic partnership of the closest sort compared to what Barack Obama is doing to the Israelis today. He is actively seeking to topple the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. He is demeaning it and signaling, I'm afraid, to all of Israel's enemies and ours that there is considerable daylight between us and Israel. And we know from past experience that whenever Israel's many enemies believe that it is on its own or that the tie to the United States is not strong, it is a powerful temptation to them to try to act on the agenda they've long had, which is to destroy Israel, to drive the Jews into the sea. And I fear what's happening here is the predicate is being set for another terrible war in the Middle East, in which many people will be killed, I'm afraid, much will be destroyed, and there will be, in no small measure, blame properly laid at the feet of Barack Obama if that happens.
Wow. Here, back on the home front, what as people are hearing these discussions and trying to somehow put it all together so they can understand it. What's the biggest danger to our own security here in this country as you see it?
The largest danger, I believe, at the moment is that we are not recognizing, let alone taking corrective action against a seditious ideology that is insinuating itself into our country and even into our government in ways that, because we're not focused on it, are advancing quite rapidly without, again, most of us even being aware that it's afoot. Specifically, this is the phenomenon that authoritative Islam calls Sharia. And that's a term many Americans are not familiar with, but it's the ideology, the legal program, the behavioral code, if you will, that is used extensively in places like Saudi Arabia and Iran and Somalia and Sudan and under the Taliban in Afghanistan. It is, in short, a barbaric, brutally repressive, women-hating, supremacist program that is absolutely antithetical to the Constitution of the United States and the freedoms we enjoy and the government we elect pursuant to it. And to the extent that this is being insinuated into our country incrementally, stealthily, it is a mortal threat, I believe, to everything we hold dear. And I fear that the Obama administration is in important ways enabling that stealth Sharia program. And it is, to my way of thinking, the single most serious problem we face inside the United States in terms of this sort of security environment.
And are groups like CARE, and I'm sure there are others that a lot of people don't know about. Are they? Do they seem to be part of what you're talking about?
Yes, this Sharia program is the agenda of an organization known as the Muslim Brotherhood, which operates internationally as well as here in the United States. In a trial in Dallas, Texas, 2 years ago, some 300 groups, including the precursor to the Council on American Islamic Relations, of which you spoke, were identified as affiliates or associated or friendly groups with the Muslim Brotherhood. Indeed, every prominent Muslim American organization in this country is either a Muslim Brotherhood front or certainly associated with its purpose of bringing Sharia, bringing the Islamicization of America about. And that's what makes this so insidious, is these groups are well established. They have a lot of money. It turns out most of it comes from foreign governments like the Saudis, like the Iranians and others. And they are beavering away inside this country in a fashion that is going to, I believe, terribly endanger, as I say, the Constitution and freedoms that we hold dear through vehicles like undermining our freedom of speech. The Obama administration won't let us talk about any of this, for example, not in its national strategy documents, and if it has its way, not otherwise either. In our financial system, there's something called Sharia-compliant finance. And then in a host of other ways that seem more innocuous, perhaps, but that, are insinuating this Sharia program into public spaces with footbaths and prayer rooms for the exclusive use of Muslims, or Muslim holidays in lieu of American holidays, or through other techniques that legitimate Sharia and begin to codify it as an alternative legal system inside the United States. And if this sounds, Willie, as though I must be hallucinating because this couldn't possibly be happening here, take a look at what has already happened in Europe. And I suggest to you that what has happened there, unmistakably, is happening here. We're not as far along, but if you begin looking at the same trajectory, at the same phenomena, the same initiatives that have begun to erode freedom in Europe to such a degree that a parliamentarian named Geert Wilders is standing trial today in the Netherlands for having defamed Islam. This is the kind of Sharia program that I believe is not only very much in the future of Europe, but it is in our future too, unless we take corrective action.
What kind of corrective action can we take as a government and as an average American? I mean, the best thing that's happened probably in the last 18 months is that a lot of people have become citizen activists. What do you think are the steps that we can take to maintain our freedom and at the same time being the country that exhibits that freedom of choice and faith?
Yes. Great question, Willie. The object of the exercise, it seems to me, is to have Americans become aware of this problem. And I'm supremely excited about having an opportunity to visit with the Tea Party in Tampa next week. Or let me just say that again. I'm extremely excited about having the opportunity to talk to the Tea Party movement in Tampa, because I believe that if they appreciate that our freedoms are not only imperiled by the efforts of the Barack Obama administration and the Democrats in Congress to bloat the budget and to take over our institutions, both governmental and private sector, but also from this sort of national security threat, it will mark a very important step towards the kind of corrective action that I'm calling for. The second thing is we need to be clear about who is in fact the problem, and that Sharia must not be allowed to establish itself in this country. And the way we address the point that you just made, Willie, is to make it clear that Sharia is not a religion. Sharia is, as I said, a totalitarian political ideology. Its purpose is to supplant our Constitution and form of government and body of laws with this totalitarian, repressive legal code. So there are many Muslims whose, faith and beliefs and willingness to practice their faith and beliefs we can respect, but who do not want to live under Sharia any more than the rest of us. We have no problem with that. Those that do want to impose Sharia in this country, I believe we do have a problem with, and we must keep America Sharia free, and that should be our purpose as individuals, as communities, and as a nation.
That's awesome. And and you answered I think a very important question in that a lot of people have wondered why these organizations never come out against openly against terrorist acts around the world. And that pretty much answered a lot of people's questions because of their connection to the Muslim Brotherhood would be the answer to that, I'm guessing. All right.
Well, let me address it if I could real quick.
Sure. Go ahead.
Sharia requires, let me emphasize, requires its adherents to engage in jihad. And by jihad they mean the struggle to achieve the triumph of Islam, this political program of a caliphate, a global theocracy ruling according to Sharia. Some will perform jihad the way Muhammad did, which is through violence, and we've all become familiar with that phenomenon at least since 9/11. Others, however, where that is not practical, or they simply can't do it, are required to do one of two things, or better yet, both: to finance those who are going to engage in violent jihad, or to perform this sort of more stealthy jihad. And in the West, the Muslim Brotherhood is all about that stealthy or civilizational jihad. And you're right. All of those Muslim Brotherhood groups, front groups or associated or friendly groups, are pursuing their responsibility under Sharia to engage in jihad. They're choosing to do it in the stealthy way, but they are certainly not going to condemn anybody who does it in the violent way.
Wow. My friend Frank Gaffney, who you've spoken with about a year ago, did explain to me that there are two worlds. There's the world of Islam, and there's a world of war and the world of Islam, and it basically boils down to that. We've got quite a struggle on our hands. What can my listeners do to help you folks there at the Center for Security Policies?
Well, for starters, we can always use your support. It is a non-for-profit organization. Secure Freedom, as I said, is our mission. It's also our website, securefreedom.org. We have a radio program, securefreedomradio.com is its website. I'd encourage people to use these as resources. But beyond that, come to the Tea Party. Be part of a movement that I'm hoping will not only save this country from sort of the creeping social, or maybe galloping socialism that is the transparent domestic agenda of the Obama administration, but to help reorient our national security program back towards what Ronald Reagan used to call peace through strength, and not an Obama doctrine of undermining our allies, diminishing our country, and emboldening our enemies.
Well, we will definitely make sure we have as many people here in Tampa to hear what you have to say to us, because I think it's the perfect thing at the perfect time. Mr. Gaffney, thank you so much for coming on today. Again, I hope to have you back again at some point in the future, and again, looking forward to meeting you at our Tea Party on the 15th of April.
Willie, I appreciate what you're doing to help educate the folks in Tampa and the country beyond, and be happy to join you in doing so at any time.
That was my interview with Frank Gaffney of the Center for Security Policy. Now, what's interesting, that interview was a few years ago. Since then, Mr. Gaffney is now, if you look him up on Google or on Bing or on Wikipedia, he is known as an anti-Muslim conspiracy theorist, which is interesting because a lot of the things that we talked about in this interview, way back in the early part of the 2000s, are coming to fruition in Europe. That's the crazy part. Things that he talked about that were, quote, that are now being deemed conspiracies are actually coming to fruition as it concerns the Islamic invasion in Europe, not only in Germany, but in Great Britain and in places like Sweden and Norway. These things are actually happening. This interview was done well before anybody knew anything about Brexit and what Brexit was really all about. And we know that Brexit is not about the economy. Brexit is about immigration. So a lot of times you can call people whatever you want, but time will reveal what was a conspiracy and what was truth, what was prophecy. So in this interview, I believe that that Mr. Gaffney was basically speaking prophecy out of knowledge of what the situation was. And there were a lot of people who were, at the time especially, and even now, who are not interested in what the truth of the matter is, because it's a very difficult truth. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the interview. I hope you're enjoying the series of interviews that I've had with people here on Blog Talk Radio. Again, it was a while ago, and my audio quality back then was not as good as it is now. So please, thank you for struggling through the AM radio single speaker in your dad's car audio quality. So thank you again for tuning in. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the videos. Bye-bye now.